Hey, welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. We're glad you're tuning into this episode. We are a viewer and listener supported podcast, so we really appreciate you listening, watching on YouTube. We really encourage you to subscribe to whatever platform you're using. If you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, or if you're on Apple or however you listen to a podcast, be sure and subscribe. We greatly appreciate it. Also, make comments if you like it and share it if you like it. We really need people to make comments and share the episodes that you like. And then also, if you're not already a supporter, we really would encourage you to go to spiritualityadventures.com and you can pick a tier, and we have bonus content for every type of giver. This is a nonprofit, so they're tax-deductible donations, but we do provide bonus content for those who are supporters. So be a part of the team, help support Spirituality Adventures, and we're so glad you're tuning into this episode. All right, welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. Thanks for tuning into this episode. I'm excited to introduce you to Tony Jones. If you don't already know him, many of you probably don't know him, at least that are listening and following what I do. But man, I've been wanting to interview Tony for some time now. He's an author of about a dozen books or so. The one that I was going to get him on here and interview him on was Did God Kill Jesus? And I loved this book, Tony.
Oh, thanks.
You did a great job on the research of that, man. But then you came out with this new book, The God of Wild Places. And oh my gosh, I loved it. And by the way, I don't actually have a hard copy. I listened to the audio driving out to Colorado, is my home away from home, where I love to climb and mountain bike and do all this stuff. And so, it just got me in the mood to get into the high mountains as I was traveling on the way. Great job on the audio too, by the way. So
thanks.
Spent like, quite a few hours listening to your voice now. So,
somebody, I heard from somebody a couple of weeks ago who said that they had just listened to the audiobook, and they said, do you know that when your dog dies in your lap, you gasp as you're narrating the audiobook? And I was like, well, I'm just glad I got through that, frankly. And I was glad to hear that, like, the engineer left that in, because, I think, if you're going to, I actually listen to a lot of memoirs if they're read by the memoirist, because I think you can get a whole nother layer of meaning and feeling in there. If you listen to the audiobook.
Yeah. So, but listening to an audiobook, like I've also listened to some podcast interviews with you. So, how when you don't have with the way my brain works, when things come in audio wise, some of the things that I know about you may have come from your book or from a podcast.
Yes.
But anyway, thank you so much. Tony was a big part of the emerging church movement with Doug Pagitt and, oh my gosh, Brian McLaren. And this is kind of, my joke was that I tried to get into that movement, but I was too old. About 25 years ago, I was too old, So anyways, that's my joke to Doug Pagitt. But I am now like re-entering into that world as a prodigal pastor, I call myself now. And so Tony has had such a huge influence on so many lives. Thank you, Tony, for being on Spirituality Adventures. And
I appreciate the invitation for sure.
So, my gosh, let's start. Just give a little bit of your background, your origin story, like just for people who don't know you. Where did you grow up?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your faith background and how you got into pastoring, and maybe a little of your personal life too, family and stuff like that.
Yeah. I grew up in Minnesota. I grew up about 2 blocks from where I'm sitting right now. My mom still lives in the house I grew up in. She's an 81-year-old widow, and I, help her out quite a bit. And she really wants to stay in her house and not go to an assisted living kind of place. So we're very tight family, all lives in the Twin Cities area. And I was really enamored by the church as a kid. I mean, my calling, as I recount in the book, my calling to the ministry kind of came out of my mouth for the first time in 7th grade as I was tapped to give the offertory prayer on Youth Sunday, and told my youth pastor I want to be a minister when I grow up. That's what we didn't call them pastors. We called them ministers at my church growing up, which betrays a little bit that it was more of a mainline context than evangelical. I mean, there were some evangelical strains in the church I grew up in, like the youth pastor, we called him a youth minister, and he was kind of like a Young Lifey type of guy and had gone to Bethel. But our senior minister had gone to Union in New York City. That's a very progressive seminary, more now than it was then, but had gone to Harvard undergrad and was, I grew up in a Congregationalist church, which is, a lot of people don't know what Congregationalism is. It's what the Pilgrims were. And it's a lot like, if you know Presbyterians, the black Geneva gown on Sunday, a choir in the choir loft, a big organ, a liturgy that kind of follows the same pattern every week. No raising hands and no speaking in tongues and no, even the pastoral prayer every Sunday was written out, So that's the kind of place I grew up in, and really early on was tapped as a leader. I mean, tapped as a leader, and also kind of insinuated myself into that church as a leader, and started teaching Sunday school. And, when I was in high school, I was a counselor for the junior high kids, and I started counseling at church camp, and really, really loved all of it. And so that was my trajectory for sure. And I went to college on the East Coast, and was planning, all along was really planning to go to seminary after I graduated. My first real speed bump in Christianity hit in my sophomore year in college, when I was kicked out of Campus Crusade for Christ for having an unteachable spirit. Is what they told me. Yeah. And having not grown up evangelical, that wasn't a phrase I'd ever heard before. You know what I mean? Mainline Christians don't talk like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
And so an unteachable spirit, what does that mean? But for him, that phrase, that my discipler at Campus Crusade, that phrase had meaning. And for me, it just seemed like an insult, and it was because I had come from a church where, first of all, we had women pastors. And so I get into Crusade, and there's this only a certain level after which women can't rise, above which women can't rise. And all the staff went to churches where they didn't allow women pastors. So I was just asking questions about that. Well, where do you get that? I grew up at a church with women pastors,
Mm-hmm.
And
what college?
And here's a fun,
by the way,
I went to Dartmouth College in New Hampshire. And then, here's one other funny college story, and then I'll keep moving the story along. But remember the books by Frank Peretti, This Present Darkness? Yeah. I bet you do.
I was ready to fight all those demons, baby.
Okay. Well, listen, man, I don't know if you remember, but there was a church. There was a church where the demons got their power, and it was in the center of town. And it had a big steeple, and it had a lush red carpet down the center aisle.
Churches are demonized.
It had brass handles on the doors. It was my church, man. It was my church. And then, and the church where the angels got their power was this little Bible church on the outskirts of town, right?
Yeah.
And that's one of the ways it hit me, was everyone in Campus Crusade was reading This Present Darkness. Yeah. And so I read it, and I'm like, did I grow up in a church that was full of demons? No, of course I didn't. I knew I didn't. So that was a funny.
They were there. They were just frozen. They didn't do it.
Right.
The frozen.
Oh, yeah. So that was a real awakening to a whole different version of Christianity that I was not aware of. And then I went to Fuller Seminary and got my MDiv. I was there from 90 to 93.
Wow.
I loved it. Had a great time. And then after that,
in at Fuller in 91.
Oh, no kidding.
Didn't finish it until 2001. And I studied with Peter Wagner and Chuck Van Ingen.
Oh, dude. Yeah.
Who's the leadership?
Chuck Kraft.
Chuck Kraft, Bobby Clinton. Anyway, that whole.
I went to Pasadena. I was the junior high pastor at Pasadena Covenant at the time, and the Crafts went there.
Okay.
And it was so controversial. Being at Fuller was wild in the early 90s. Well, because
I was starting a vineyard in Kansas City while I was flying out and taking classes.
Oh, yeah. So you had at Fuller, and you can, I mean, if this is too off track for your listeners, but early 90s at Fuller was so wild because you had people like I was taking classes from Colin Brown, this very distinguished English systematic theologian. Miroslav Volf came on to Fuller faculty when I was there, and I took classes with him. I'm taking postmodern philosophy from Nancy Murphy and Jim McClendon. Meanwhile, in the School of World Mission, which of course just is now they've merged, but at the time they were just brother sister basically. You have Chuck Kraft and Peter Wagner like mapping the demons that are over Los Angeles County and naming them. They had maps on campus, and they would.
I went on a trip with Peter to one of these places and saw him in action, doing this stuff. Yeah.
Oh my! I mean, it blew my mind, and I thought those guys were. I mean, I was like, they're heretics. Yeah. This is not biblical. There's no. I was there for the systematic theology and the philosophy, but I enjoyed it. It was, again, opened my eyes to a whole different kind of Christianity that I was unfamiliar with. And then, fast forward, I get out of seminary. I spent 3 years doing youth short-term mission work, mainly on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. In 97, I received a call to go back to my home church and be the youth pastor. That was the same year I got married, bought a house, did all those things. By 2003, I had 2 kids. My marriage was in trouble. I left the church. I went to Princeton to get a PhD in theology. I finished, but not till I was married to somebody else. That marriage blew up in 2008. With 3 little kids, I finally had to leave. And, yes, you've already said it, so I don't need to recap it, but the emergent church movement was part of that time. So it was this crazy experience that maybe you also have experienced, where my professional life was absolutely clicking on all cylinders. I was killing it. I was getting on a plane every week. I was getting book contracts. People were wining and dining me. Meanwhile, my personal life was circling the drain. And I was living 2 lives, and I couldn't save my marriage. And when that blew up, sound familiar? My career also blew up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No.
And it really hit me twice, because in 2008 and 9, I got divorced, and I kind of survived that, honestly. But then in 2015, when that last book came out, Did God Kill Jesus? I was also in the middle of a custody fight, and I ended up getting custody, but my ex-wife posted a bunch of lies about me on the internet that basically destroyed what was left of my career.
So I was totally I didn't know that world that you were going through, but my world was, I was public, my church was growing every year. I've got one of the largest churches in Kansas City. People return my phone calls.
Yeah.
Now they don't, by the way, but
I know the feeling. Yeah.
But, anyway, no, my personal life, my marriage was never healthy, honestly. And I was married 37 years.
Oh, dang. I made it 12 and a half or something.
A year, and was engaged a year before that even.
Wow.
Nobody knew that. I knew it. My counselor knew it, but even my closest friends, I didn't really talk about it much, because I always tried to honor my wife and stuff. And and I screwed up, but I was also battling insomnia. Everybody knows this. And I ended up getting addicted to Xanax and alcohol, trying to deal with my insomnia. And I didn't start either of those two things until my late 50s. Like I was 56 when I finally went to a psychiatrist to try to deal with my sleep. And he was old school, put me on Xanax, which was great. And then I got addicted, and then it stopped working. And then I threw it out. Yeah. I did Xanax and alcohol every night for 2.5 years, ended up being unfaithful, I confessed everything to my board. And then my wife was the first person I told about the affair that I had had for like a year. And then I got sent to rehab for 120 days. My wife filed for divorce. My board forced my resignation, and I came home to the house and had to hire a divorce lawyer. And that was the darkest year that's 2019 for me. And I was about done with life, honestly.
I bet.
If I lived or died. So anyway, different story, but at least
parallels.
There's a little, but at any rate, I've been in recovery now for 5 years. I'll come up on 5 years of been very active in the recovery community here in Kansas City. So
congrats. That's awesome. About
God of Wild Places. Cause you I loved your book, man.
Thanks.
I was like resonating all along the way. Like nature is my thing. So I'm older than you, but when I was like 12, I saw Jeremiah Johnson. Not knowing, and I was an introvert, a huge introvert.
Yeah.
Voted the quietest guy in my senior class of over 500 people.
Oh my gosh.
And called to be a pastor. Right. And I was smoking weed at 14 and got saved at a Southern Baptist youth camp at like 16, and then turned into, Mr. Evangelist and tried to overcome my shyness. But I wanted to be a mountain man like Jeremiah Johnson. And I was already backpacking and camping out and fishing and living in nature. Every weekend I would go camping basically when I was 14, 15, 16. I wasn't in Boy Scouts. It was just me and a couple of friends. So, and then I've been doing that ever since. And so your love for nature that is captured in the title, The God of Wild Places, was like, oh, this is awesome. I'd much rather read God of Wild Places than Did God Kill Jesus, even though I love God Kill Jesus. So
yeah. Me too. I mean, I think I'm done writing books about systematic theology, doctrines, prayer, stuff like that. I think I'm trying to forge a new literary path. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that as I was reading The God of Wild Places, or actually I was listening, right, as I was driving out to Colorado.
Yeah. One
of the questions I had was like, I couldn't tell, where, like, so since I don't know you very well, and this is our first conversation, you were started in a more progressive Christian theology, right?
Yeah.
Mainline world. But then you interacted with the evangelical world. But then you got into the emergent church world, which was kind of evangelical-ish, but moving toward progressive church, right? Almost like evangelical version of mainline churches. Is that a...
Yeah.
I'm saying...
Yeah.
The question that I want to get to is, was there some point along the way where you were actually like questioned everything, including even the existence of God? That's what I'm wondering. When I was reading the book, like, cause I actually questioned the existence of God in my darkest time. Like I literally an atheist. I didn't like say I was an atheist. I would just say I felt like one, and it felt like that. And then I had enough. I was always believed in an old earth, an old universe. I've never been a new earth guy. I've always believed in theistic evolution, so I had plenty of fuel to toss onto all my questions, doubts, and disbelief that I experienced. I was curious if you ever actually questioned God's existence along your path, or did it just take you to the wild places more and more and more the further you progressed?
Well, I'd say that in the emergent movement, yes, it was a little bit like my experience in Campus Crusade and my experience at Fuller Seminary, where and then in the emerging church movement, where I was the most progressive or one of the most progressive persons in that cohort of people, because they were all coming out of evangelicalism. So they had different baggage than I had, you know. They had a lot of mega church baggage, seeker sensitive. They were all really schooled in Rick Warren and Bill Hybels and that was what they were coming out of. Right. My development and my draw to emergent was theological and philosophical. It was not really how do we do church better. It was more like how do we understand the gospel better. Okay. So there were really, I think, two streams, and there was a pragmatic stream and there was a theological stream, and a lot of people had both. Brian McLaren had both, and Doug had both, and ultimately I had both. But you then would have people like Dan Kimball, who had only the pragmatic stream. He had just had no interest in really rethinking theology, you know, and to this day kind of distances himself from the emerging movement and even his own involvement in it, because it became liberal, you know, too liberal for him. So that was I wasn't a fish out of water, but I was like, I think everybody, even in the day, if you would have asked Doug in 2000, 2001 about me, he would have been like, oh yeah, he's like our mainline guy. You know, he's our progressive mainline guy. I mean, so I just heard about this because I did a podcast that you would probably love called Emerged, which was it's like an oral history of the emerging church movement.
I haven't listened yet, but that's one.
Yeah.
Trip did with
you should listen to it. We did it with Homebrewed, and there's at one point, I guess I had done something, I had said something. And then Brad Cecil, I just heard about this he said it while we were interviewing him for the podcast. I had never heard this story before. But then Mark Driscoll was like, I'm not going to let some liberal youth pastor tell me what to think about anything. And he was talking about me. So
who was that?
Mark Driscoll. I mean, Driscoll probably he probably should have listened to me a little more.
He should have, for sure.
Anyway, Fred, I questioning God's existence is a regular part of my life to this day. It has been for a long time.
Yeah.
I can't say with certainty that God exists. I think God does exist in some form. I continue to have a great affinity for and affection for Jesus of Nazareth. I think that his life, as recounted in the Gospels, and the effect that he had on the early Christians was astounding. And so I'm really drawn to Jesus, and that kind of, if Jesus is so awesome, who's the God behind who's the puppet master behind the puppet? Not that Jesus was a puppet, but you know what I mean? Like, who's behind the curtain? But it wasn't like, for me, it's never been like I had a dark night of the soul. I hit rock bottom. I questioned God's existence. And then instead for me, it's always been like, I'm gambling. I'm gambling. It's like Pascal's wager for me. Yep. It's like I'm gambling on the idea of God because I think it's a good bet, but I might be wrong. And Richard Dawkins might be right. Sam Harris might be right. I mean, they make very compelling arguments, and I'm a very materialist Christian. I don't believe in angels and demons. I don't think there are spiritual forces that are immaterial, that are making things happen in the universe. I think what we see is what we get. Now, there's a lot of stuff we can't see, but eventually, we're getting better and better at measuring those, even measuring dark matter. You know what I mean? Like measuring the empty spaces. Yes. And that's what I mean by material. I don't really think there's an immaterial aspect to the cosmos where all the truth lies.
Yeah. So By the way, folks, if you love hunting, which, I'm grew up in Missouri, dude, like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of hunters. Like I had guys that would go out hunting before church on Sunday morning in their camo and then have a dead deer or turkey or something in the back of their truck.
Oh, yeah.
Church and then go home and clean it or clean it.
I've done that. I've done that and preached. I've hunted and then gone to preach and preached in my hunting gear and then go back out hunting. Yes.
So I've done cycling races on Saturday afternoon and then gone in and done a Huggy baby wipe bath and then preached on Saturday night.
Funny. So nice.
Anyway, so read Tony's book, The God of Wild Places. If you love nature, if you love hunting, if you love the outdoors, you're going to love his, great ink, just great writing, great metaphors, nice. Great stories. It stoked my love for nature all over again. You know what I mean? Just reading nature literature. So I felt like I was reading, Jim Harrison or any number.
Oh my gosh, dude. I love Jim Harrison.
People that, that just stir, I've gone through like outdoor life or outside life outside. Mm-hmm. They have their top outdoor literature books. I've read all of those books. I'm a big John Krakauer fan, all those kind of.
Me too. Yeah.
So I just want to encourage people to read it just for the love of the outdoor that comes through your book.
Thanks.
But here's what I want to dive into a little bit with you. Natural theology.
Okay.
Your last chapter on God in the book, you dive into natural theology and really what natural theology brings to us. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I want to talk a little bit about, peace. Number one, you talked about peace versus, our connection to phones and all that electronic world versus nature. And then you talked about failure, death, and predation are all the way through your book. Mm-hmm. That's a theme, like death and life, death mm-hmm. and resurrection, if you want to use it as a metaphor. Right. But like, here's a thought I've had, because today I like to say, hey, if there's a God, then the really only God I can really love and believe in is an uncontrolling God of love. And I would definitely fall in the panentheist category. Mm-hmm. When I read Braiding Sweetgrass, mm-hmm. Have you read that?
Yeah.
I was really compelled to become a pantheist after reading that. It was so beautiful, Yeah. What a beautiful book. Another book that stoked my love for nature. And I grew up loving indigenous indigenous peoples. I took Indian guides in YMCA instead of Boy Scouts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Same.
So I fell in love with that world. But, my thought, Tony, is that really all theology is natural theology. And the reason I say that is because if you look at the revealed religions or that claim to be revealed, I mean, then you get into exclusivity, like really fast, right? You get into dogma mm-hmm. statements about God and advanced theology statements about God. And why? Because God gave me this plate of tablets on the mountain.
Yeah.
And whether it's, so when I dive into like Buddhism and some of the Eastern philosophies, it seems to me like all they're trying to do is read nature and read people in this intuitive fashion and come up with some beautiful things. I mean, if you study other religions, there's truth in all of them, I think. Right. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me like everybody's trying to read nature and then try to figure out if there's a God, how does it all work? Right. And then if we get into this thing where we get into revealed religions, then all of a sudden I'm right and you're wrong. And everybody's really just trying to read a mystery that nobody can really uncork it. I mean, anyway, I've come to the conclusion that we're all just trying to read nature and life and human beings are a part of the nature web and trying to make sense of all of it. Mm. And I still love Jesus too. I still believe in God, but I'm not uptight about. I like to say I'm less certain and more open these days. And I really think that we're all trying to read nature. I don't know. Am I making sense in this question?
Yeah. I mean, I don't disagree with you, although you and I both know that revealed religion is the way that people justify their love of the biblical text. Because that's not just emanating from nature. You know what I mean? Like, that's not just growing from the ground and falling off of trees. Like, the belief is that the Bible was inspired by God and was written in some form. We'll call it infallible or call it inerrant or call it what you will, but that's what revealed religion argues, that there's something unique about that text that you cannot get anywhere else. You could never learn about Jesus' saving power by looking at a sunset or watching the ocean waves or climbing a rock face. You can only get that in the revealed religion. And, the adherents of Islam would say the same thing.
Right.
It's only through the Quran that you get the true teachings of Muhammad and therefore can live a faithful Islamic life.
And the Torah of the Jews is a revealed.
Exactly. And you can go on and on. And you're right. When you get into things like Buddhism or Hinduism, some of the other major world religions, you don't have that as much, but you still get it in Latter-day Saints. You still get it in Scientology. I mean, almost every one of these religions claims a sacred revealed text that gives you information you could not otherwise get.
Right.
So what natural theology argues, and there have been a lot of great Christian theologians, most notably probably Thomas Aquinas, who argued for natural theology and saying there's a lot you can learn about God without the revealed text of the Bible.
Right.
And
it walks you up to the edge of faith, but then you have to take some kind of leap.
Yeah, or something like that. Or yes.
Like a nutshell of Aquinas. Anyway.
I mean, there have been, of course, people who've had their Damascus Road experiences without the Bible and have heard from Jesus directly. But even that's not considered natural theology. That's considered revealed theology because, well, you come from a charismatic background. I mean, there's a lot about that. He was the big influencer of the Jesus movement, had an acid trip in California Canyon and saw Jesus. And that's how he. Right. Yeah. So
mushroom trips, will give you revealed.
Oh, I've heard. And I've heard. And I would say that what I'm interested in this book, and particularly as I kind of moved out of the church world, is, I'm most interested in the God I can find in the wilderness. That's the God that interests me. Mm-hmm. So that's what I wrote about, and that's who I'm pursuing. Yeah.
So when you dive in all the time, we can't live without something dying. Mm-hmm. You're constantly bringing this up as you. Yeah. I feel like I know more about cleaning a deer now or a turkey or something than I did before, even though I've cleaned tens of thousands of fish. I've never hung a deer up and gutted it and done all that stuff. But I mean, the reality is that everything that lives off something that dies. Yeah. It's a cycle of life and death. I've often thought, nature is a serial killer. Right. I mean,
yeah, well, I mean, it's brutal.
It's brutal. Right. And yeah. And then at the same time, nature is the most beautiful thing that I know of. I don't think they're not. I mean, beauty and savagery are not mutually exclusive. So what struggled with me through the years is like, is there such a thing as evil? There's certainly injustice, right? I mean, people that mistreat other people and stuff like that. But at the very core of nature, is there something evil? I've asked Tom Ward this question too, right? If you dial it all the way back to the beginning of mind and matter, right? If there's something more than matter, there's something there that's mind and matter and spirit or something. Like, where the hell do you get evil from? Like, if there's no, and then, of course, Tom and the process guys talk about, well, everything has agency of some sort. And so everything, even a rock, can contribute, I guess, to some sort of agency that pushes creation towards something good or something less good. This is an interesting puzzle to me. I've read it. I've thought about it from the Buddhist side of things, the yin yang. I've thought about it from just an atheist perspective. I've thought about it from a Christian perspective. When you dive into this death and life and what all of us, even people who are vegans, exist because something has to die, right? I mean, there's no way you can get around it.
I mean, you can go on YouTube today. There was just a 3-hour and 15-minute debate I did with a Christian vegan was just released today. And if you really want to torture yourself, you can watch all 3 hours and 15 minutes of it. Yeah, it was a crazy experience, kind of a mind-boggling experience. Look, I don't think it's evil.
Do you see
what's that?
Do you see evil as some sort of? Do you even believe in evil?
Here's what I think. I do not think it's evil when a wolf eats a deer.
Yeah.
I do not think it's evil when a killer whale eats a tuna.
Right.
I think that human beings are the only moral animals. We're the only rational, moral animals. Mm-hmm. And so we're the only ones for whom evil even makes sense. I mean, we in some ways, we made up evil or it was given to us by God. It doesn't really matter if we made up the 10 Commandments or if God delivered the 10 Commandments. Doesn't really matter. For the point is,
they existed in other forms way before Moses.
Well, my point is that there's no parallel construction of morality for any other species on this planet other than human beings.
Okay.
Apes don't have a moral code on tablets that they have to follow. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Dogs don't. Only we do. So, I mean, that human beings are unique in the creation. And I think among the aspects of uniqueness that we carry with us are this kind of moral understanding of good and evil. But it's also very, it's very tricky and it's very nuanced and it's very complex because is it evil for us to kill other animals and eat them? Well, we've been doing that as human beings for 100,000 years. But if you go look at the comments on that YouTube channel where me debating that Christian vegan, I mean, I just looked, I'm not going to read the comments anymore because I was just getting destroyed. I mean, everyone thinks I'm a terrible, evil person because I kill animals and eat them. So like all the vegans have come out to say, well, but of course they're not being honest because vegans are responsible for the death of all sorts of critters. I mean, whether it's they're driving down their suburban street and drive over a squirrel or the critters that are extirpated when their fields are plowed so that they can have the vegetables that they want to eat and the grains that they want to eat. You know, like that's what we human beings do is we move, we extirpate critters to make so there can be more human beings.
Yeah.
So I do think there is such a thing as evil. And I do think that our ancient ancestors understood that. And that's why they codified things into laws. I mean, yeah, of course you can go back even before the Old Testament, but it wasn't just in ancient Near Eastern cultures, but I mean, you see it in the writings of Aristotle, and in Plato, they're struggling with these same issues. So these are issues that human beings have dealt with for a long time. So to the point of the book of me killing animals, I just said to myself going into the book, I am going to be honest about this. I'm going to be honest about the fact that I eat meat, and therefore I'm implicated in the death of animals. You want to call that the murder of animals? I don't really care. Just don't say I'm harvesting animals, because I'm not going to use any euphemisms for it. And it's funny because you were at Theology Beer Camp last year, and I started my talk by talking about killing a duck, and with my hands in front of my kids, and I was very graphic about it. And people got up and walked out and left the conference and never came back.
Wow.
Because a lot of people just don't want to face that reality that all of us who eat meat, and that's 85% of the people on this planet eat meat. Mm-hmm. So we're all implicated in the deaths of animals.
Yeah.
Is that evil? I personally do not think that's evil.
Right. Nor did the indigenous peoples think it was evil. Nor did the ancient Jews, the Israelites. They didn't either.
Nobody. They had a lot of laws around it. Yeah. Like there are all sorts of dietary laws, and there are in other religions as well. There are dietary laws, because they
sacred kill.
They took the responsibility of the kill very seriously. And as you know from the book,
it was a sacred thing.
Man, it was people like you and me. It was the clergy class of people who did the butchering.
That's right.
Back in the day, 10,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, it was the priestly class who killed the animals. That's how sacred it was. That we're going to have our basically, for all intents and purposes, our pastors be our butchers. I mean, think of that. Most pastors these days, pastors, this is what I like to say. Pastors have soft hands. All the pastors I know have real soft hands. No calluses.
From mountain.
You do rock climbing. No blood under their fingernails. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you go back 5,000 years, and those priests, man, they had a sharp knife in their belt, because that was part of their deal.
Yeah, definitely. I took my whole staff out fishing one time, and I had some staff who'd never fished, never killed anything, We caught, all of them caught fish. It was great. And then, one of the guys, we were going to just catch and release. And then one of the guys said, man, I'll take those fish home. And I said, okay. So I just cleaned them right on the dock,
Yeah.
Like one of my guys was like a opera singer, and he's going, dang, dude, I can't believe you know how to do that. Like, I'm just cleaning a fish, dude.
But here's the thing, right? If you would have taken him in Bill and Ted's time machine and dropped him at any point in our past, our human history, and dropped him name it, you name the society, you name the time in history, he would have been the only person who didn't know how to clean a fish.
Right.
Like, he's here.
Yeah.
That opera singer is alive today because his ancestors knew how to catch, clean, and eat fish.
Yeah.
And meat, and
Yeah.
That's why we're here.
Yeah. I was down in Ecuador, and I was with this elderly lady who was doing all her cooking, and I went to the market with her, and she was getting some chickens. There's all these live chickens in cage. She says, I want that one, and that one. And the dude pulls them out, cuts the neck, blood. He's got rubber boots on, and then he bleeds it, and then he guts it, and then he puts it in this barrel with had rubber around it, and put two wires together, and it spun around and ripped the feathers off. And then he put it in a plastic bag and handed it to us. It's like, that's fresh chicken right there, man. So
that's how people do it. And so when Christian vegans these days look down their noses at people who eat meat, I'm like, you're looking down your nose at a woman like that who and the guy in the market who's selling the chickens. Like, this is what human beings do. We raise domesticated animals and we hunt wild animals, and then we eat them. And that makes you uncomfortable, just like go look in your fridge, because it's full of ground beef and chicken breasts and cans of tuna.
So one of the things you point out is that if you get this movement away from nature, I mean, like there's kids right now that are growing up on phones or spending 5 hours a day on their cell phones. They don't play outside. They play video games. They're afraid of bugs. They don't, I mean, you know, like they have no experience in nature.
Yeah.
You bring out a point. One of the things you get from moving your life, your sacred life back to nature. Okay. Whatever religion you're from, let's just say move it back to nature. You talk about one is peace. Talk about peace real quick. What do you mean? How do we find peace in nature? PEACE.
Yeah. Well, that chapter is really about how I found peace in nature in the midst of a lot of strife that was, I think, here's the deal. And you've experienced this a little bit, but I had kids, so it was that much more complex getting divorced and then having a custody fight. I was locked in a bureaucracy that did not care about my humanity. I was a cog in a machine. I was just another divorced dad trying to get more time with my kids. Like every 30 minutes, there's another dad in the court on the docket. Right after me, another dad was going to come in and ask for more time with his kids. And after that, another dad. It just goes on and on. It's like a Franz Kafka novel, you know, the family court system in a big metropolitan area like Kansas City or Minneapolis. And it stripped me of my humanity. And I felt that. I felt trapped in that bureaucracy. There's a point in the book where I recount a recurring dream I used to have in those days, where I would be being chased or falling, or, you know, we've all had these dreams, and I'm screaming at the top of my lungs, but no sound is coming out of my mouth. It's like no one can hear me. I felt completely alone, even though I was surrounded by people. I live in this big metropolitan area. I'm going to court. I'm sitting in a waiting room. There's people all around me. I'm surrounded by people, and yet I feel no one can hear me. I'm all alone, which is a crazy feeling, you know? And then when I went outside, when I went outdoors, and when I ventured away from the Twin Cities into these wild places, the Boundary Waters, are off on a hunt, sitting in a deer stand, I'm alone, but suddenly I don't feel lonely. Mm-hmm. I don't feel alone. Even though I'm like physically alone, I feel like I'm a part of something. Mm-hmm. And that's this web of creation, you know, maybe what you feel when you're biking or when you're climbing a mountain or something like that. So I found peace in wild places, the places that, frankly, like you said, are very intimidating to a lot of people these days, because we live very comfortable lives. We like our air conditioning. We don't like to get bitten by mosquitoes, you know. And it's becoming harder. I mean, I think that's a natural evolutionary trait that we seek after comfort and safety, but we're losing something by never exposing ourselves to discomfort and risk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man. So spirituality adventures, you know, I was like, when I started 3 years ago, I was just like, you know, that's what I've always been into, is adventures, and particularly outdoor adventures. Right. But for me, even the whole trying to figure God out is an adventure, or not figuring God out is an adventure, you know. Yeah. Failure was another of your big points in how life exists because of death and failure, and because of, you know, predators, you know, right? Well,
let's just talk about your life and my life. I mean, both of our lives are marked by significant public failures at marriage, right? And what has grown for you? I know what's grown for me out of that failure is I'm a better dad. I'm a better human being. I'm a way better spouse second time around. So that failure, you know, there's a lot of imagery in the book about, in the compost of a dead tree grows that as that tree is decaying, if you get down on your hands and knees and dig around on a dead tree that's kind of, falls apart in your fingers, it's full of millions of insects, and there's moss and mushrooms growing in there, and maybe a little squirrel or a chipmunk has made a little house in there. And then you see the shoots of a new tree growing up from the composting humus of the old tree. Like this is, I think, part and parcel of the planet Earth that we live on. Is this new life comes out of the compost of the old. The sad thing is, as we continue to, pave paradise and put up parking lots, we have less of that wilderness available to us. So, I'm like very involved in the conservation movement, trying to save wild places, make them available to people, because I think it's a spiritual necessity. Yeah.
What are there some groups that you're connected with that way? So the conservationists?
Yeah. I mean, they're all hunting groups, because that's my thing. Backcountry Hunters and Anglers is one that is really working on preserving public lands, access to public lands. So it's for hunters and anglers. Okay. There's a lot of fly fishermen in that, if that's your thing. But it's a great group. Pheasants Forever is a fantastic conservation organization. I'm part of another one called Sportsmen for the Boundary Waters and Save the Boundary Waters. These are organizations that are trying to protect the boundary waters in northern Minnesota from mining. There's constantly threats that they want to mine. They want to mine right by this last unprotected wilderness in the lower 48, where you can drink water out of the lake, man. I could take you canoeing, and you could dip a cup in the lake and drink I take trips. I lead trips usually of pastors. In fact, this year I'm taking a trip of guys in recovery in September on to the Boundary Waters. Yeah. And the first time I just dipped my nalgene in the lake, and they're like, "Whoa, you can't drink lake water, dude. You're going to have the runs for weeks." I'm like, "Not up here, brother. This is clean, and we need to keep it clean."
Yeah, that's awesome. Love it. Yeah. Out of failure, there's this post-traumatic growth that's a real psychological thing. And I think a part of what I've gone through, questioning, doubting everything that I've ever believed, and then allowing what reemerges to come out. And like, I have way more empathy for everybody that's gone through pain and suffering than I've ever had in my whole life. And I always thought I was a pretty empathetic pastor, but holy crap. Now, like the LGBTQ plus community that's been wounded by the church, like I will fight for those folks. My church is, recovery people, LGBTQ plus people, it's just about love and empathy and caring for one another, caring for the planet, caring for living creatures, caring for everything. And I'm not anti hunting either, so I think it's the death and life and cycle of everything that goes on.
In fact, I was fishing up north with a buddy of mine who was a smoke jumper for 33 years for the Forest Service. And we were, I don't know, somehow we drove past some sign with Smokey the Bear on it. He says, "Smokey sucks." He's like, "Smokey the Bear is the worst. We need forests to burn because it's disturbances in forest that causes new growth." And I think that's just such a great metaphor for life. Like, for so many years, we suppressed forest fires. And he's like, no, we need to have prescribed fires. We need to let these fires burn like they have for millennia. The Native Americans used to light fires because they knew it would regenerate the forest. And if they wanted blueberries, and the forest had got overgrown, they would light it on fire, and they'd come back the next year, and suddenly there'd be new growth of blueberries that had been shaded out previously. So disturbances, man, growth comes after disturbance.
Yeah. Well, let me, we're out of time. I could talk forever about nature with you.
You can go ahead. Fire your last question at me, man.
Yeah, but you ended with Psalm 68. some reflections on Psalm 68, which is a brutal passage. It's like who's God's bigger, and this mountain God and this mountain God, and then this mountain God's going to kill all these, and like it's a brutal passage. But you brought back the old use of Shaddai to be mountains or breasts, and how even the gods were tied into these natural features of nature.
Yeah.
And seen significant in these, like, I like to talk about thin places, the old Celtic term,
Right.
And then you wound up back to Exodus 3 with this concept of God that's in this great term. What a great term to use two verbs to be together. This Yehya, Esher, Yehya, however you pronounce that. But it's I will be that I will be.
Yeah.
Give us your take on that.
Well, as my rabbi buddy says to me,
give us your take on that, from your thought on God from that. And we'll close with
I will become who I am becoming, like God. And this would be Tom Ward would like this a lot, that God is a process of becoming, like God is becoming. So the two, first of all, on the mountain, I mean, the reason I like that Psalm so much, it's one of the oldest Psalms, and it just shows how the ancient Israelites, like our forebears in the faith, they knew that mountains had power and that nature had power. So much so that they imbued these mountains. And look, they weren't the only people. This was very common among ancient peoples, that that God is a mountain, that river is a God. Like there's a river God in the Tiber in Rome. You know what I mean? Like every great river was not contained a God, but the river is a God somehow. And the mountain is a God, and I think it's sad.
Himalaya mountains, they learn to pay respect to the gods of those mountains.
Right? Of course.
All those mountaineers, even if they're atheists, they learn to pay respect to those gods.
That's right. And they fly those Tibetan flags. And they go to the Buddhist temples and they spin the deals, and that's right. They call it superstition, call it faith, call it what you will, but it's like deep in the human psyche to do that and to connect with the spirit of that mountain and the power of that mountain,
Yes.
And I guess I just really like that Exodus 3, that God is in this process of becoming. God is not a static being, but just like this planet we're on, it's evolving and changing, and we're affecting it for good and for ill, and we have to probably check ourselves on that. So I do think, I don't know, I'm not really an evangelical because I was never really an evangelical. I don't know if I'm a deconstruction guy or what. I don't think I really am. I just think my whole thing is evolving, and I think there's a lot of a biblical witness for that same kind of evolution. Yeah.
I'm with you. I like to say less certain, more open these days.
There you go.
And
I like that.
And love is the guide for me. Always double down on the love wherever it's at. But
good.
But death is a part of life, man.
Oh yeah.
No,
I mean, I'm on my way to the hospital to visit my cousin who's dying of cancer. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's super sad, but also not totally unexpected,
Yeah. Well, Tony, thank you so much. I know we've run out of time, but thanks for your
thanks for having me on,
thanks for your ministry. Thanks for sharing this memoir with me in the world. I loved it. I
appreciate that.
I enjoyed my drive out to Colorado listening. So thank you.
Good. And let's we'll have a beer. Well, you won't have a beer. You can have a coffee while I have a beer at beer camp.
That's right.
But, I'll do and any of your listeners too. It's such a fun time. It's really going to be a great gathering this year.
I'm going to take my mountain bike, try to find some other people to ride with me.
Good.
Yeah. So
Aaron Simmons will, I bet. Aaron Simmons will.
I've interviewed Aaron, and we're to hook up on the mountain bike one of these days.
Perfect.
For sure. All right. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in to Spirituality Adventures. We appreciate it. Take care. See you next time. Hey, you made it to the end. Thanks for listening all the way through on this episode. By the way, if you're not already a supporter, go to spiritualityadventures.com, sign up for one of our monthly supports, and you will receive our bonus content. You'll receive lots of interesting information about our guests. Many of our musicians will do special bonus songs and record a song. So I want to encourage you to do that. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Be sure and subscribe. Be sure and share any of the episodes that you like. And be sure and make comments if you like them as well. This helps us get Spirituality Adventures out there to more listeners, more watchers. So whatever platform you're using, subscribe, like, share, make comments, and go to our website, sign up for our team, and be a part of the team support. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.